tonight, where this week has begun for a White House clearly on defense. Take a look at this. This is brand new visuals of these protesters rallying across the country today on, yes, President's Day, and it's very real. They are opposing what they call a presidential power grab at the border. Americans taking their message here all over the country, using this holiday to talk to the president. The outpouring, of course, echoes those massive protests against another Trump executive action on immigration that ultimately faltered in the courts, the travel ban, which was limited several times by federal judges. Now, many in the resistance are applying basically that same strategy to this controversy. Tonight, I can tell you, almost a dozen states reporting they will formally take Trump to court to challenge this national emergency. Now, this effort from the state side joins what you see up on your screen. These are many of the independent organizations also taking Donald Trump to court, including the ACLU. Now, these challenges are already having an impact. Let me explain what I mean. This is very real, and whether Trump gets away with taking money that wasn't appropriated to build a wall is also a very real thing this week. So the White House is now under very tangible pressure to offer more than rhetoric to defend this border policy. Winning in court often requires precedents. You have to show a time when maybe another president has tried to seize money that Congress refused and try to show why that helps your case. Well, that is something that Donald Trump's immigration guru, Stephen Miller, struggled to basically answer in any way when he was asked in the normally supportive environment of Fox News.
Answer my question. Can you name one case where a president has asked Congress for money, Congress has refused, and the president has then invoked national powers to get the money anyway?
Well, this current situation...
Just yes or no, sir. Has there been a single case where Congress asked for money for military construction, Congress said no, and then...
The meaning of the statute, Chris, is clear on its own terms.
Would you agree the answer is no? There hasn't been a single case like this.
Spicy. Meanwhile, Dems in the House pushing forward to just repeal this attempt to declare national emergency from the start. Now, this is not just House theater, because what we're seeing is that House Democrats actually believe they might be able to appeal to additional votes in the Senate, because there, people in both parties have expressed concern with whether this could be an unlawful and unconstitutional executive order.
I think there's enough people in the Senate who are concerned that what he's doing is robbing from the military and the DOD to go build this wall.
Past Congresses have given any executive, any administration way too much power, and this would be another expansion of that power. That's why you see an awful lot of us concerned about this.
I'm joined by Mara Gay, editorial board member for the New York Times, and Tal Koppen, Washington correspondent for the San Francisco Chronicle, and we'll be joined by a member of Congress as well. Tal, when you look at this out of the Hill, is this a fight that Republicans want to have and defend the president on for the timetable with court battles of months?
I'm certain that this is not the fight that many Republicans wanted to have. Now, that's not across the board. Keep in mind that Senator Lindsey Graham has really been spoiling for this for a while and actively on Twitter, in person, in conversations, encouraging the president to take this step. But there are many other Republicans who, whether it's sort of brazen out in public saying it or just privately, are very disconcerted by this move. And they, whether it ends up getting blocked in court or not, they're almost concerned more that it could go through, and then that future presidents, Democratic or inclined to take other sorts of moves, could use it as precedent going forward.
Yeah, I mean, that's the new Green Deal argument, Mara, that someday some liberal might be president and get to appropriate all sorts of things without the Congress. There's also just the straightforward fact that Donald Trump didn't make the strongest case for an emergency. Take a look at him at that presser.
I want to do it faster. I could do the wall over a longer period of time. I didn't need to do this, but I'd rather do it much faster. The only reason we're up here talking about this is because of the election. This is one of the ways they think they can possibly win, is by obstruction and a lot of other nonsense. And I think that I just want to get it done faster. That's all.
Just a light preference for a little more speed. Is that an emergency?
It's not. I mean, there's a couple of things going on here. One is that I think Americans realize that the wall is actually not what our national priority should be. I think that we have huge infrastructure needs, education needs. We actually have the 9/11 Victims Fund, which helps first responders who came to the September 11th attacks, that's running out of money, and we're going to build a wall to be a symbol of hate and keep out, desperate refugees. So I think Americans understand that this is not a crisis unless you want to describe it as a crisis of his own making. Mm-hmm. But the other issue here that's interesting is, this is a president who has broken so many norms for years at this point. And so in a sense, this is nothing new. The difference is that now he's getting organized pushback that actually has a real voice, and that's because after the midterm elections, you have an energized Democratic Party, an energized base, you have protests out, and you have a bunch of 2020 candidates who are all, they're forcing Trump to share that FaceTime on TV. And he's not the only voice in the room anymore. And it's going to be harder for him to get away with breaking these norms.
Yeah, and there's also the fact that a lot of people who follow this seem to understand that it's not a conservative versus liberal thing, which is where many issues come down. I mean, the abortion issue almost always plays out that way. This is conservatives having been vocally against this in public, Donald Trump being for it because of his old campaign promise, then trying to back down and not being allowed to by the Rush Limbaughs and the Ann Coulters. Take a listen to Rush saying, no, don't worry, that's not the case, which from some people seems like a clue that it is the case. Here is Rush Limbaugh and Trump.
Rush Limbaugh, I think he's a great guy. He's got one of the biggest audiences in the history of the world. I mean, this guy is unbelievable. They don't decide policy.
But I don't make policy. It's just another effort to continue to try to diminish the president, diminish Trump as somebody who doesn't know what he's doing. There isn't anybody doing what I do that has a thing to do with actually making policy for this president.
I mean, the problem for the president is he's, a one-note band. I mean, he always plays to his base, but at the end of the day, he's not in the middle of a Republican primary election right now. He's supposed to be
Well, is he a one-note band, or is he, even more embarrassingly, is he more Milli Vanilli, and these aren't even songs that he's performing?
It's before my time, Ari.
Do you, Tal, can I phone you in for the Milli Vanilli reference? Lip syncing is
yes,
what I'm talking about. Rush Limbaugh being the original singer here.
Yes, I got it. I think, I think Rush Limbaugh's being a little glib here. Does anyone think that he's sitting in the West Wing, scribbling on a piece of paper, coming up with policy ideas? No, but that's not what's really being suggested. The problem here is that President Trump sort of lives in an echo chamber. We know that he sort of obsessively watches cable news. He really focuses on what Fox News is saying. He pays very close attention to what the Rush Limbaughs of the world say.
Do you believe Rush when he says he's not writing the lines?
I'm sure that President Trump is taking his cues from a lot of that sphere.
He shouted him out at the national emergency
Yeah.
press conference. I mean, it's all out in the public.
Yes, and some of it is also just responding to what they criticize, which I think is just as important as where he's getting his ideas. I mean, keep in mind that the reason we got into this whole mess is that in December, President Trump was on the verge of signing a deal that would have arguably gotten him more money at the end of this, and the echo chamber came up in arms, and he backed away. So in some ways, arguably what he doesn't do because of that echo chamber is almost more important in some times than what he does end up doing.
Right, which, whether you agree with those folks or not in right-wing media, makes them relevant to understanding literally what's going to happen. And look, Milli Vanilli famously in Blame It on the Rain, you know what they said, Tal?
Go for it.
Blame it on the rain. The rain don't mind. The rain don't care. Tal's never been on the show before, Mara, so she doesn't know what's going on. But we appreciate both of you. I'm going to turn to a congressperson, and I won't press them on 90s music references. Thanks to both of you, Mara and Tal. I turn to Democratic Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky of Illinois. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me, Ari.
Absolutely. Let's start with trying to make sense of this. We just showed and are picking up on the Rush Limbaugh conversation. And as a member of Congress, it seems that you're dealing with the surrogates, which is the president trying to do this power grab, and the silly, which is him shouting out Rush Limbaugh on Friday to explain what he's doing. So how do you make sense of that? What are you focused on? And will this, in your view, ultimately stand up? Will he get to spend this money lawfully?
Well, he isn't spending the money lawfully. This is definitely a lawless act on his part. But I think it's a very political act. I've been getting emails from Eric Trump, from Donald Trump, and they all end with donate, 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 after they say how Democrats are obstructionists and that you of the media are just liars. You're lying about the real crisis at the border. But he's gone a step too far now, because he has shown his contempt for all agencies of government, and now it's about the Constitution.
Well, you say the
because
Constitution. Isn't that the issue? I mean, if there's a President Joukowsky or a President Harris or a President whomever, right, we're still a system of government. The question isn't whether you like the spending, right? The question, as I was always taught, was whether it has been lawfully appropriated in our system of government. And take a listen to your colleague on the Senate side, Lindsey Graham, who seems very blasé about this, which, again, he was a military lawyer. He's steeped in the Constitution as you are, and he doesn't seem to think this is a big deal. Take a look.
Aren't you concerned that some of these projects that were part of legislation that you helped approve in Congress are now going to possibly be cut out?
Well, the president will have to make a decision where to get the money. I would say it's better for the middle school kids in Kentucky to have a secure border. We'll get them the school they need, but right now we got a national emergency on our hands.
Congresswoman, I think that exchange is so telling and, frankly, just not how the government's supposed to work, because wouldn't it reduce to rubble what you and Senator Graham and all the congresspersons do if after you appropriate stuff, it's then renegotiated with the executive? What did I miss?
First of all, 83 senators and 300 members of the House of Representatives. So that means, of course, Republicans and Democrats voted for the deal. And so he's saying that we don't care, even though I don't care, he says, even though that it's been deliberated, we've gotten bipartisan support. I'm the one who's going to overrule that. And this is a very dangerous move to take away the power of the purse from the United States Congress.
So
it is very clear.
Is this about border policy, which people debate, or is this, in your view, at bottom about power and a president seizing power that the Constitution doesn't give him?
I think it definitely is about power, and I think it means that we may have to look at the National Emergencies Act to see if it needs to be clarified so that we know for sure that the president can't step in and overturn a decision of the Congress.
Very interesting. And as you know, a lot of this broke on Friday. Today's a holiday. Viewers catching up with what's happened Friday and today, and a lot more with the new lawsuits that we'll be tracking. Congressman Jan Schakowsky, thanks for coming on The Beat.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.